All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to Improving Availability of Native Plants in New Brunswick. My name is Julie Cormier. I'm the Executive Director of Vision H2O. I will be your host for today. But you may see some of our partners that were responsible for the presentation of this discussion today.
Now, I would like to pass the microphone to the first presenter, Gary Schneider, the MacPhail Woods. Gary, vas-y.
Great, thanks. I just want to thank Serge and everyone else who's done so much work getting this together. I have a lot of slides to show. We'll try to get through them, but I'm hoping that I can inspire you to get excited about native plants. So hopefully this all works. So we started MacPhail Woods in 1991. It doesn't seem like 32 years ago. And we're a project of the Environmental Coalition of Prince Edward Island. So we didn't set out to be a native plant nursery or really focus on anything like that. And I called this talk Changing Attitudes because that's really what our work has been. We didn't set up and respond to public concerns. We set out to drive public concerns. And that continues to this day. So we were, as you see in New Brunswick, this is what we saw all over Prince Edward Island and still do in a lot of cases. So bad forestry practices that limited the amount of diversity on those sites, that did a lot of soil damage from compaction or from too much excess sunlight on the sites. Terrible wildlife habitat for most birds. So we're trying to move away from that. If anything was done on those clear cuts, it was plantations of things that probably shouldn't be there and shouldn't be there in those cases. So my interest originally was in birds, right? So if I'm looking at a red pine plantation and thinking they're biological deserts, there's not really much going on there for wildlife. When you look at the forest floor, you see the lack of diversity in other plants. There's not much else shooting up because they don't have enough light. They're not really valuable. So we're trying to figure out what kind of role they play. But these are the types of things we wanted to change. And there are enough remnants of the Acadian forest, the Wabanaki forest, throughout Prince Edward Island to give me great hope that we could get some of that stuff back and that we didn't have to settle for bad, unhealthy, low-value forests. The problem was when we set up the project, there was no way. I'm just going to see if I can get these photos off me. Beautiful. We wanted to do a bunch of different plantings, but we couldn't find sources for them. In a lot of cases, we couldn't even find seeds for them. About 75% of PEI was cleared for agriculture at one time. And so we've lost most of our seed sources, except in small pockets. So generally, the forest types we were dealing with were very early successional. They were growing up on abandoned farmland. So white spruce, black spruce, eastern larch, some balsam fir, trembling aspen, white spruce, those kinds of species. And we wanted to go through the whole range of plants that would be suitable for those sites. So the fenced in area in the back was our first nursery, done, I think, started in 92. And it was 40 feet by 40 feet. And I thought, you know, if we ever fill that nursery, that's going to be a dream come true. No one told me to stop there. So we just kept growing and growing and growing. But honestly, it wasn't in response to any consumer demands. It was in response to loving plants and wanting to know more about native plants and wanted to fit them back in so we can start rebuilding biodiversity in our forests. So we never really thought about native plant landscaping. We were mostly thinking about reforestation and restoration of forests. This is our nursery pretty close to today. A lot more damage from Fiona. but we're about 4 acres with the Arboretum. And we grow trees, shrubs, wildflowers, and ferns. Most of it is grown from seed. We do some from cuttings, and we also buy some plugs from forestry on occasion when we're short of things. We try to grow things in the sort of 2 to 3 foot range. That's easy to handle. It's a lot easier on your back. We do have some smaller plants, but we don't grow plugs at all. And occasionally we start growing big stuff, which again is very hard on your back, but fortunately you can dig them up with a tractor. This is about a 18, 20 foot high sugar maple that we've been using in plantings. They're just gorgeous plants, but generally we try not to get into that market. We have a shaded area for things that need a little bit more protection or looked after a little more closely. Some things we can stick in the field and we don't have to look at them, but other plants we want to be really careful with, especially some of the rarer ones. And we tend to plant things very tightly and then transplant them. So these are transplanted blue bead lily, cornflower. And they'll be ready to move again in probably a year and a half or two, and then to plant out right away. We never had a greenhouse for more than 30 years, but we got one through a gift from the province about 2 years ago. So we're really just learning how to make best use of it. It's quite a large greenhouse, and there's a lot to learn. I've been involved with food greenhouses before, but this is a different beast. And we're very fortunate that it held up in Fiona. We use every bit of manure and compost that we can find. Again, it's a big nursery now. We luckily have a couple of horse owners who will either bring us the manure or we'll pay for delivery. And that's been a godsend. You can imagine filling out 100 or more beds. We use a ton of compost and stuff. And when we say bare root plants, we don't wash the roots of soil. So we're actually selling our best soil every time we move a plant. So we've got to compensate for that. We're trying to make a lot more use of organic growing techniques. We've always been organic. We've never been certified, but we've never used fertilizers, chemical fertilizers or insecticides. We're using a lot more buckwheat as a smother crop to keep down the weeds. So it means less hand weeding. I believe this is winter wheat, might be fall rye. Again, as a smother crop and to bring some organic matter back into that soil, which is critical for us. We're also using a lot of different clovers, again, as a smother crop to rebuild some nitrogen levels in that soil. And the nursery isn't a smooth operation, I'll tell you. It's we also do a children's program. We do all kinds of management plans and forest restoration. We have 2,000 acres of public forest land that we manage, all kinds of courses and workshops. So sometimes the nursery gets neglected, but we try not to let it get neglected too much. So I don't want to paint a picture that everything's perfect in the nursery. We set up an arboretum about 7 or 8 years ago, really to display beautiful plants, because I can talk about nice plants and I can even show you nice slides, but it's only when you see them in action, in person, with insects and birds and stuff around them, that you can fully appreciate them. We tend to plant things in big blocks. They're really useful for attracting pollinators. And we've even put in a wetland area. I've always wanted a pond, so this sort of gets me through that need. But it's really fun to be growing things like pitcher plants, which again always seem so exotic, but you can grow them and relatively easily. And we found a seed source for bake apple, for cloudberry they call it, up on the northwest corner of PEI. And they're really a beautiful plant. And it's interesting because I read 2 or 3 papers on growing bake apple, and they kind of said, don't bother unless you're using some serious chemicals to break the seed coat on them. And what we usually do is we just clean seed and plant it and don't worry about it. And we've been remarkably successful with both the cloudberry and many other species. We use all these areas for multiple purposes. So when we do tours, when we do workshops, when we do university classes, we use the nursery and the arboretum to teach ecology, to teach identification, to teach birds. So we're trying to get multiple results out of one action. And there's a tremendous interest. Again, when we started, it was really trying to get people to understand these plants and to think about using them in their forest. And then we started giving workshops on native plant landscaping. And people started wanting us to come out and do the landscaping. So that's become a big part of our work. And it's really nice because it funds a lot of our work that doesn't pay, because we're going to landowners and carrying out work for them as any landscaper would. So this is one of just a simple landscape beds. There's a red baneberry and a white form of a red baneberry, and hairy sweet cicely on the right, and ostrich ferns, and all kinds of things in there. This is a shaded bed that has 4 or 5 types of ferns and witch hazel and things that will grow well in those areas. We've done tons of new beds and beds out in the open, all using native plants. We've done a lot of woodland plantings, which are really interesting. So around people's house, or this is the part of the old arboretum at MacPhail, the shaded arboretum. We've done plantings at maybe 20 schools. And again, the planting is one thing, getting the students involved is another thing, getting them working together is another thing, and getting them interested in native plants and starting to think about the birds that might come to those sites. So you get so many positive results from one action. And just a bit of a heads up, just because they're native plants, they can't go everywhere. So I remember somebody coming back kind of in a steam one year and saying, you know, the sugar maple I sold him didn't do very well. And I said, well, where did you plant it? He said, in my cottage up on the North Shore. So it's getting salt spray and full sun, probably never got watered and stuff. So we always try to caution people to use the plant in the right place. So to learn about those plants, but these are red pine growing in a really windy location and they look awful and they should never have been planted there. So just again, we always caution people who are buying plants or coming to workshops that just because they're native doesn't mean you don't need to know anything about them and you can really beat them up. One of the favorite parts of my job is collecting seed. So if we're out for a walk, if we're birding, if we're doing research on whatever areas we're researching, we're always collecting seed. That's a really fun thing to do, especially of plants that you've never grown before. And I find seeds are really interesting. I like to look at them. I like to play with them. I feel like a kid again because I can run my hands through things. These are witch hazel seeds. It's one of the plants that taught me that just because something is rare doesn't make it difficult to grow. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but I always associated rarity with difficulty, but it's not connected at all in many cases, not all, but many cases. So we've probably grown, I would say conservatively, 10,000 witch hazel. They're seeding all over the place, which is really fun to see. We've probably changed the status of this plant on PEI. There was only a few places you could find it, and now there's lots of places you can find it. Not enough probably, but lots. Every fall we're collecting acorns. My daughter and I collected acorns. She's 32 now. She was probably 3 when we started collecting acorns. Great activity for kids. These are yellow birch, just starting to sprout. We generally put the birches on the surface of the soil. They seem to do better with sunlight. you can get a ton of plants growing in a small area. And again, we try to keep them tight, and then we'll transplant them out once they get true leaves on. Same thing, this is a bed of swamp milkweed, really tightly grown, and we'll transplant them out, space them out. These are seeds from nodding trillium. I think, again, a lot of the seeds themselves, or the seed casings, or the fruit, are quite beautiful. Like a lot of things, we just don't look at them well, but these are gorgeous. They're almost like pieces of art. These are seeds from blue flag iris. And we found these from a site in North Cape where we found the bake apple and squash berry. The northeastern part of PEI, it's a perched bog. It's on a very high cliff, but it has all kinds of rare and interesting plants there. And I saw some blue flag iris, and I collected the seed from it. They're about 6 inches high and pretty ratty looking because of the conditions. And I thought, well, maybe I will do a planting like this somewhere, and I'll need a plant that will take salt spray and lots of wind. So I brought them back to the nursery, and I'll show you later on what they looked like when they came. We do all kinds of non-rare plants. These are chokecherry. They're a fantastic plant for wildlife. So they may not be a specimen plant for landscaping, but they're great in a windbreak or in an area where you're trying to get something growing, an old field planting. And that's usually the stage we'll transplant them at, when they got enough root to carry the top of the plant. Again, we collect hemlock, all kinds of conifer tree seeds, sugar maple. Besides the seeds, we will grow things from cuttings. So willow is next to impossible for us anyways to grow from seed, but it's so easy to grow from cuttings that we don't worry about that. So we'll take cuttings usually in March and get the callus growing on the base of them, stick them in some compost or sawdust or whatever we have. And then as soon as they start forming roots, we'll plant them out. We do a lot of cuttings from common elder. So it's the elderberry that you use in wines and pies, but also a fantastic plant for wildlife. So mostly stem cuttings, we'll just cut them in the fall and stick them in the ground and get quite good roots on them. We also do root cuttings from common elder, and bayberry is another one that grows well from root cuttings. Wild rose. We've also tried doing some aeration with cuttings, and you get water underneath and you get air bubbling the water. It's supposed to be quite magical, and I think they use it a lot for growing dope, but for what we wanted, I didn't find much value in it. It was a lot of fussing, and we're not generally in that much of a hurry for 20 or 30 plants. You know, we often grow hundreds of plants at a time, so seeds really work well. So hemlock is one that we use a lot in landscaping, but also in forests. So again, we're all about trying to get these forests back into health. And as long as we have the right light conditions and enough organic matter in the soil, we can really do well reintroducing species such as hemlock. White ash, I know people are worried about diseases and insects. Hemlock woolly adelgid is definitely a thing. The emerald ash borer is definitely a thing. I don't think we can give up on species. And we're not talking about planting, 1,000 trees per acre in a plantation. We're talking about putting these in as a mix. And if they don't do well, they don't do well. But there's something that wants to eat or infect every tree and every plant. I think, we can't sort of worry and say, well, we're not growing butternut, we're not growing this, we're not growing American elm. You wind up having little to choose from. And I think about the example of Norway maple, where about up to maybe 5 or mostly 10 years ago, people thought Norway maple was God's gift to trees because nothing seemed to infect it until tar spot infected it. And now everybody's trying to get rid of it. So it was we're trying to predict what will happen to species, and we really are very poor at that. This is straight maple. Again, because we're working with a lot of old fields that have grown up into forests, we don't have near as much of that as we should. It's a gorgeous tree. If you're landscaping or you're trying to restore your forest. The flowers in the spring are so gorgeous. And the bark, especially on the younger parts of the trees. So it's one we use to get that diversity within the stand. So diversity isn't just the amount of plants or the amount of wildlife, but it's the structure of the forest soil. It's the heights of plants in different trees. So you have different layers, different canopies in your forest. And the reason that's important is that some birds like to feed on one area, but nest in another and perch in another area. So if you just have a red pine plantation where all your growth is on the top, it cuts out that area for a lot of species. Ironwood's another tree, again, that's fantastic for reintroducing into forests. You have much more of this than we do on Prince Edward Island. We're down to very few areas with ironwood, but it's a great landscape tree, and it's also a fantastic plant to put into woodlands. This is, I'm just looking at time. This is witch hazel. It's a medicinal plant. It's another plant that'll give you sort of 15 feet of height in the forest, but it's almost as perfect a landscape plant as you can think. So we used to grow it because it's rare, and now I grow it because it's beautiful. And I think we often will look at native plants as, wild and tough and maybe hardy, and the other plants that we know as beautiful. But when I look at our nursery, our landscape beds, and other people's landscape beds that's full of potentilla and weigela and boxwood and things like that, I've got no problem talking about how beautiful our beds are and how beautiful those plants are. And part of that is, how do we learn things? So I didn't have, and still don't have, any horticultural training, but I learned the plants that I loved and kept finding new plants that I loved and tried to move forward with that, learn how to grow them, learn how to use them, where do they fit into environments. Where if you take a traditional horticultural training, they don't teach you a lot of these species. So it's really no wonder that we stick to ones that the nurseries provide and that the landscapers are asking for. These are beautiful berries on them. Great plant for birds. This is the hobblebush again. Great colors in the fall. That's just a super, super landscape plant. We do a bunch of plantings for people and continuously do these for people who are really interested in getting birds to their property. So that was a pine grosbeak. They're a fruit-eating bird in the winter. So we use things like wild rose. Again, it's a lovely plant. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to bag them up or cut them off every year. We just let them grow. And they're quite beautiful, and they flower a long time. So they'll flower into September and give you some winter color. So these are all plants where the fruits will hang on most years. These are American mountain ash, more reddish berries on them, smaller, keep them over the winter. A high bush cranberry, another plant that's fantastic for wildlife. That's what it looks like in the winter. So it's just a lot of food hanging on. And the robins and many other species go crazy for it because you've got food on in the winter. This is one of the hawthorns. I think this is the fireberry hawthorn. I hadn't known how beautiful the flowers were until I took a close-up of them. I thought, man, that's an exotic plant. So again, lots of food over the winter, not first choice food, but it's the thorns on those hawthorns, which are about 2 inches, maybe 2.5 inches long. They're incredibly useful for birds. The small birds can hide in there. This is a plant that we're using all over the place. It's winterberry holly. It seems to grow in almost every environment. So landscaping is fantastic, but woods with a little bit of light into it, wet areas, it's great for that. Another one that produces winter food. I don't really like the plant until it starts forming berries and they turn orange. So in the fall, the leaves will fall off and the berries will just stand out like crazy. And again, all kinds of birds and small mammals will eat those fruits. This is one we saw up towards Surrey, and it's Bohemian waxwings and pine grosbeaks. And it's like, wow, those are two incredibly beautiful birds because you have that food available. Serviceberry is another one, great for pollinators because it's so early. So Saskatoon, Indian pear, Indian plum, shadbush, all kinds of names. Many of them have beautiful colors when they emerge. So they actually have fall-like colors in the spring and then turn green. Tons of fruit on them. I think the best tasting fruit that's grown, certainly wild food that's grown in PEI. And we've forgotten how good they are. We've forgotten almost how to eat things. Red-berried alder is a big rugged plant that's, again, we grow for wildlife and not really much else. It's not really a specimen plant, but it produces a ton of food and always attracts birds. And its brother or sister, the common elder. Beautiful landscape plant, this one. And again, some of the most beautiful birds. These are cedar waxwings that you can find anywhere. Wild raisin's another plant that I get really excited about. We've had some insect problems with it, but it's really a beautiful plant. Produces these really interesting seed clusters or fruit clusters that have different colors. And it's really attractive for lots of different types of birds. Purple finch. I'm going to speed a little bit. Red osier dogwood, a common plant. People forget how beautiful it is, but I go to other places and they're using it all the time as a landscape plant, which we've sort of reintroduced, gotten people used to using. And again, lots of birds we think of as seed eaters or suet eaters, fat eaters, change their eating habits when there's lots of food available. Things like, we sell quite a few beaked hazelnut, so the native hazel that we have. They're edible to humans, but if you have hazelnuts around and you have trees, you're going to get flying squirrels. And that is one of the most beautiful mammals that you can find anywhere. And I mean anywhere. They're so gorgeous. They're a nocturnal mammal, but they're beautiful. And we get to see them at night because they come to feeders. A few more rare plants. This is bog birch. It's about a 6-foot-high birch. And I always thought if something's called bog birch, it will only grow in bogs. But we grow it in our nursery, and it seems to do just fine. It will tolerate those bog conditions. So those are the flowers in the spring, really pretty. Round leaf dogwood. So we have 4 native dogwoods, including bunchberry. We do a lot of planting for people who we're trying to encourage pollinators, and they're interested in having more wildlife. So it's a good mix. So this is swamp milkweed. As soon as we started growing it in the nursery, the next year we had monarch butterflies. The thing I like about this especially is that it gives people an opportunity to help with an endangered species by providing food and habitat. And people will call me up and they've come and bought plants, taken them home, done all the work, planted them, call me up and thank me again because now they have caterpillars on their milkweed, as if I've done something special where we've just provided opportunities. We try to keep our nursery quite wild, so there are opportunities for things like this, for birds' nests. We have wild spaces. And not just butterflies, but these hummingbird moths are really so exotic. And that's, again, when you have a mix of plants, you can get all kinds of interesting critters around. I'm getting my 5-minute notice without even seeing it. This is cutleaf coneflower. Big, tall plant, beautiful, in Rudbeckia family. 6 or 7 feet high, great plant for pollinators. But I didn't realize we have these big blocks of them in the Arboretum. In the fall, we'll have 50 or 60, besides the grasshoppers, 50 or 60 American goldfinches come and spend maybe 2 weeks just cleaning out our beds of cutleaf coneflower. Joe Pye weed's a rugged plant, so some people don't like it, but I think it's gorgeous. It's tough, and it's another great plant for pollinators, as is boneset. Blue vervain, I think, is a stunning plant. We only started growing it 4 or 5 years ago. I had never met it before, but it's a really pretty plant. And our beds of vervain are just packed with pollinators, sort of, I'd say, in July area. This is the offspring of those seeds that I brought back from North Cape. These funky little 6-inch plants turned into 14, 15-inch plants that are just, the flowers on them are incredible, so complex and the colors blending together. And the other plant we use for pollinators are these small blue-eyed grass. So they get overwhelmed easily, but in the right setting, they're really a nice addition. And again, small plant, we don't look at them very much. A few more I'm going to race you through. These are yellow violets. Again, if you're doing any kind of landscaping, they're fantastic. They will bloom from late May until September. Each one of these pods has about 70 seed in them, and they're fantastically easy to grow. In fact, in some cases, they're almost a pest, right? Because they throw their seed and they open, but that's a pest that you would love to have. These are jack-in-the-pulpit fruits. Again, really a piece of art, right? They're so beautiful. And we grow them from seed, and then we start growing them from the corms because they expand like bulbs. These are the blue bead lily and cornflower corn lily, they call them. Again, a smallish flower. We don't look closely, but when you do, you're really rewarded with a beautiful sight. This is our small dogwood that we have. This is bunchberry. In the fall, it looks like somebody's decorated your woods. This is the painted trillium with the coloration in the center and the upright flower. And we just collect the fruit, clean them up, and then plant them. And they take a while to grow, but they're not difficult for sure. These are nodding trilliums, the other trillium that we have that's native to PEI. And this is one of our nursery beds with them. Another really interesting flower. This is, two more. This is Dutchman's breeches. I love the little flowers. It's a spring ephemeral. It comes up and then goes away, but the foliage is really delicate and beautiful on them. Canada anemone is another plant that's really easy to grow, almost too easy to grow. It does spread like crazy, but the white flowers on them are so brilliant. And I think I'll just do the vines. This is our native clematis, Virgin's Bower. Really nice small white flowers in the spring, but I love the fall colors. I hadn't realized that they would be so colorful. And the last one I'm going to show you is groundnut. So we found some seed on Lennox Island. The flowers, again, are big and they're really strange looking, but quite beautiful. The groundnut was brought over, I think, to replace potatoes in the Irish potato famine. And we think they were brought to PEI from the Mi'kmaq, by the Mi'kmaq, but not much work has been done on them. They're hard to grow as a cultivated crop, and they do produce some size. So it's something that we're going to keep looking at. And I was going to talk to you about ferns. I got 1 minute left. So this is a bronze holly fern, only found on 2 places on the island. And there's another one, male fern. We started growing things from spores. So that's a whole nother topic, but that's something that can be done. And I'm going to make my time. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think we have 5 minutes for stuff. So that's a ton of information. Sometimes I do afternoon workshops with those plants, but it's nice to have 30 minutes to get through them.
Thank you so much, Gary. Merci, Gary. C'était très intéressant, beaucoup d'informations.
Thank you, Gary. It was very interesting. A lot of information. I see there are a few questions in the chat. So I'll pass over the mic to Serge. Can you unmute yourself, Serge?
I think Samuel was asking about using sedge lawns. That's something that you're familiar with, Gary?
So using what?
Sedge lawns. So maybe
Sedge lawn. I don't know anything about that. Sorry.
It's getting popular in the States. All the sedges are sold out and like it's
Cyperaceae.
Okay.
Carex, like the Carex species.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we don't do much on lawns. We do landscaping for people, but I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, you can do it when it's work.
Thanks for bringing that, Samuel. There was a question in terms of schools and how have they been at maintaining gardens that are planted, especially sort of in the long run or in the long term?
I think they're fantastic. I think they're better than some landowners.
Okay.
And one thing I found is that we do the placement. Everything's set up for them, but they dig the holes and they plant them, they haul the water and they mulch the plants. And we talk about them. So it's not just a planting, but it's an educational experience. So the kids come to me and say, you know, is it okay if I come and water my plants in the summer? And I thought, well, that's very cool, right? And they name them often. So not perfect, not everything. And we do still get maintenance people who will run them over. But most times with the schools, we're dealing with the principal or the vice principal, as well as a teacher. So we make them pinky swear that they're going to talk to their landscape people and their maintenance people, and they won't be running over things, right? They're going to be careful. It's going to be a bit more work for them, but those students put a lot of effort into planting those trees, and over the years, that's going to have an incredible impact on that school.
Nice. Building that stewardship for sure.
Yep.
Judy had a question about, do you prefer growing plants and trees from seeds or from cuttings?
I love growing them from cuttings. Yeah, I'm sorry. I love growing them from seed. I do cuttings as well, and it's fun. To me, one of my big things is if I can collect that seed, I understand where it came from. And when I plant it, I know more about it. And when we're actually harvesting those plants and moving them to another place, and then when I see birds nesting in those trees or eating that fruit, and then when I see those plants seeding out, that's really the end goal, right? It's not just putting a plant into place. That's a big deal, but not really that big a deal. But when I see an ash tree start to seed ash, or I see a red oak start to have young all over the place because of the seed, that's increased the footprint of the work that I've done tremendously, right? So when we talk about restoring fields and stuff, we're not putting 1,000 red oak per acre in. We might put 6, let all kinds of other things come up, but eventually those 6 red oak, we're going to treat them nicely, and they're going to start seeding in, not only to that acre, but to 4 acres and acres and acres away as the squirrels and blue jays move them.
Looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a question here about, do you sell trees and or seeds to the public?
Yeah, we do. We don't do many seeds, although we do. The wildflowers are a little bit easier to do them in bulk. And we're starting to work with the city of Charlottetown to figure out like a highway mix that we would, for one of their parks that had a development beside it and a lot of things torn up, but they're looking at something that we can spray on, which I think is pretty creative of them. So we're going to work and see how that would be. I tell you, lots of times we just give things away. I feel we've had so much help with things. So if somebody comes and says, I want to start a nursery, can you give me enough seed? I can't do that. But for landowners, and especially people we've worked with a lot, you know, we try to be not hoarders of information or material or anything like that, because I think everybody at MacPhail feels really fortunate, right? We're doing great work, I think. We've done it for a long time. Staff have been there for a long time, but it's pretty remarkable to get up in the morning and love your work. And I've been doing this particular job since '91, and I still love my work. So I can't be hoarding things, right? If somebody comes and says, I want to grow swamp milkweed and I need some seed, we'll help them for that, right? Because it's not really any harder to collect, an extra 5 heads of swamp milkweed seed and stuff. So I think the answer is when we can, we try to be very friendly with that.
That's awesome. Such amazing information. So great to hear it in your voice and with your passion and history and the amazing work you putting through together. A lot of questions about some specific, exactly like you're saying, you're not hoarding any of this information. So people are looking, lots of questions on specifics. That your website's a great source in terms of what you offer at the nursery, also in terms of your workshops that you offer. So folks might want to look into that. I'll paste your website into the chat. People can have a look there. And we'll see about getting perhaps some of these questions in at the end of our session. At the end of the presentations, we'll have a bit of a panel, like a panel discussion or a little more of a Q&A session. So we'll jot some of the questions that are in there now in the chat, and we will get a chance to get to some of them anyways.
Great,
That
thanks.
was wonderful, Gary.
Thanks, Serge.